Oliver, you need to step back and let the grown-ups handle this. Felix Thorne said it right there in Conference Room C, at the Pentagon in front of Colonel Reyes and 3 other Air Force acquisition officers. I'd been in the middle of explaining the technical specifications for our radar upgrade proposal when Felix walked in 20 minutes late, straightened his tie, and decided to take over my presentation. My name's Oliver Reed. I'm 55. Been working defense contracts for 20 years, ever since I got out of the Navy. And that moment right there, watching Felix dismiss me like I was some junior engineer, in front of people I'd been working with for nearly a decade, that's when I knew things had to change. But let me back up a bit. I started at Advanced Defense Solutions right after my Navy retirement. 20 years in the service, last 8, doing procurement logistics in places the Pentagon doesn't like to talk about publicly. Elias Vance hired me himself back then. Said he needed someone who understood how government contracts really worked, not just how they looked on paper. Those early years, I was everywhere. Trade shows in D.C., meetings at Wright-Patterson, calls at 0510 because someone at Aberdeen needed clarification on technical specs. I learned which procurement officers had been there since the Clinton administration and which ones were rotating through on 18-month assignments. More importantly, I learned who made the real decisions and who just signed the paperwork. My security clearance is TSSSCI, top secret with sensitive compartmented information access. Took 3 years of background checks to get it. The kind of clearance that can't be transferred or rushed, no matter how much money you throw at the process. Felix doesn't have any clearance at all. Can't even access half the files for the contracts he's supposed to be managing. For 17 years, I worked directly with Elias. Every Monday morning, we'd sit in his office going over pipeline opportunities, contract renewals, relationship maintenance. He understood what it took to keep government clients happy. It's not about the lowest bid, he'd tell me. It's about trust and expertise they can't get anywhere else. Then came the restructuring 2 years ago. Elias said the company was growing, needed fresh blood, modern management techniques. Felix came from commercial real estate, had an MBA from Vanderbilt. Strategic perspective, Elias called it. Someone who can bring business discipline to government work. The thing about Felix is, he's never been wrong about anything in his life, at least not in his own mind. First week on the job, he asked me for a breakdown of our government business. I spent 3 days putting together a presentation covering 14 active contracts, 22 potential opportunities, and the relationship map I'd built over 2 decades. He listened for maybe 20 minutes, then asked, "Can't we just streamline this and bid lower to win more?" That should have been my warning. Claire and I talked about it that night over dinner. She could see I was frustrated, but we've got Chloe starting her senior year at James Madison High, already looking at colleges that cost more than my first house. Julian's a freshman playing junior varsity football. Needs new gear every season. Our mortgage has about $285,000 left on it, and with college looming, changing jobs wasn't exactly appealing. Give him a chance, Claire said, clearing the dishes. Maybe he'll learn. Over the next 2 years, I watched Felix take credit for every successful proposal while staying as far away as possible from the actual work that made those successes happen. When Colonel Reyes called with questions about the radar project, she asked for me specifically. When the folks at Huntsville wanted to discuss technical requirements, they scheduled around my availability, not Felix's. But in management meetings, Felix presented everything as his strategic vision coming to fruition. The worst part wasn't the credit stealing. It was watching him convince himself that government contracts were just like commercial real estate deals. He'd interrupt my calls with procurement officers to suggest efficiency improvements. He'd schedule his own meetings during times I'd specifically told him I was managing critical proposal deadlines. Last month, I overheard him telling Elias that the government division was finally running like a real business unit, as if the previous 19 years of steady growth and relationship building had been some kind of amateur operation. But back to that Pentagon meeting, Colonel Reyes had specifically requested this briefing on the ANFPS 132 radar upgrade proposal. It's a $47 million project over 4 years, involves classified technology integration, and requires someone with both the technical background and security clearance to walk through the implementation timeline. I'd been working this proposal for 8 months, knew every specification, every potential problem, every procurement requirement. Felix showed up late because he'd been stuck in traffic coming back from a networking lunch in Georgetown. Walked into the room like he owned the place, apologized to the colonel for the delay, then looked at me and said I could sit down, he'd take it from here. Actually, Colonel Reyes said, we specifically asked for Oliver to present this. The technical requirements are quite complex. Felix smiled that MBA smile. Ma'am, I appreciate Oliver's input, but I think you'll find my strategic overview will be more valuable for your decision-making process. I watched Colonel Reyes' expression change. She's been doing acquisition for 28 years. Came up through the Air Force Academy. Knows when someone's trying to snow her. Mr. Thorne, does your security clearance allow you to discuss the classified components of this proposal? Well, no, but the high strategic implications. Then Oliver needs to continue his presentation. That's when Felix said it right there in front of everyone. Oliver, you need to step back and let the grown-ups handle this. The room went dead quiet. I mean, you could hear the air conditioning. Colonel Reyes looked like someone had just insulted her personally. The other officers were staring at Felix like he'd lost his mind. I kept my voice level. Felix, perhaps we should discuss this outside. No need. I'm sure the colonel understands that sometimes we have to manage our technical people carefully. Colonel Reyes stood up. Gentlemen, I think we're done here. Oliver, please call me directly when you're ready to discuss the actual technical specifications without interruption. After they left, Felix tried to spin it like the meeting had gone well, that he'd established the proper chain of command. I just packed up my laptop and walked out. That night, Claire found me in the garage organizing my tools, which is what I do when I need to think. She sat on my workbench and waited. Bad day. Felix called me a technical person who needs to be managed carefully. In front of Colonel Reyes. Claire knows Colonel Reyes. We've had her and her husband over for barbecues. Military folks stick together, and Amanda Reyes is as professional as they come. What did she say? She ended the meeting and told me to call her directly. So call her. I did. The next morning, Colonel Reyes was direct like always. Oliver, I need to ask you something and I want a straight answer. Does your management understand what's required for this project? What do you mean, ma'am? I mean, does Felix Thorne understand that this isn't a commercial contract, that we're dealing with classified systems integration, strict timeline requirements, and oversight from people who don't care about his MBA? Because if he doesn't, we need to know now. I thought about how to answer that diplomatically. Colonel Felix brings a different perspective to the business. Oliver, we've worked together for 8 years. I'm asking you directly, can he do this job? The honest answer was no. Felix couldn't handle the technical requirements, couldn't get the security clearance, couldn't navigate the procurement bureaucracy, and didn't understand the difference between selling office buildings and managing defense contracts. But saying that felt like betraying my company. I can handle the technical side, ma'am. That's not what I asked. 3 days later, Felix called a division meeting to discuss what he called relationship management optimization. Apparently, he decided that our government clients were getting too comfortable with informal communication channels and needed to understand proper corporate structure. Going forward, he announced all client communications will be routed through my office first. We need to ensure consistent messaging and strategic alignment. I raised my hand. Felix, Colonel Reyes specifically requests direct technical discussions. Most of our clients do, Oliver. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to change. These are business relationships, not personal friendships. The client needs to understand who's in charge. That afternoon, I got a call from Silas Cross. Silas runs Pinnacle Defense Solutions, our biggest competitor in the government space. We'd talked informally at a defense conference 6 months earlier. He'd mentioned they were looking for someone with my background. But I'd brushed it off. 20 years with one company meant something. Oliver, I'm going to cut to the chase. We just lost our senior partner to retirement and need someone who can step in immediately. Full partnership track, equity stake, and every government relationship you bring stays yours to manage. No micromanagement, No strategic oversight, no MBA telling you how to do your job. Silas, I appreciate the offer, but 60% salary increase, signing bonus, and your own division. You'd report directly to me, no middle management. I sat in my truck outside the office for 20 minutes after that call, engine running, thinking about Chloe's college applications and Julian's football camp, and the fact that Felix had just spent an hour explaining to a room full of engineers how he was going to revolutionize relationships that took me 2 decades to build. That night, Claire and I sat on the back deck after the kids went to bed. I told her about Silas's offer. What do you want to do? I don't know, 20 years, Claire. That's a lot of history to walk away from. It's also a lot of respect you've earned that Felix doesn't seem to understand. You think I should take it? I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. But I also think Chloe's college isn't going to pay for itself, and Julian's going to need help with whatever he decides to do. If Felix doesn't value what you bring, maybe it's time to find someone who does. The decision point came the following Monday. Felix had scheduled a meeting with Elias to discuss optimizing our government division efficiency. He wanted to consolidate all client relationships under his direct management, establish standardized communication protocols, and bring in outside consultants to modernize our approach. I listened to him present this plan for 30 minutes. Elias nodded along, asked a few questions about implementation timelines, seemed generally supportive of Felix's initiative. Oliver, Elias said finally, what's your take on this? I looked at Felix sitting there with his PowerPoint presentation and his consultant recommendations and his complete lack of understanding about what made our government business work. Elias, can I ask you something? Do you know why Colonel Reyes specifically requests me for technical briefings? Because you're good at your job. It's because over 8 years, I've learned exactly how she likes information presented, what level of detail she needs, which technical issues matter most to her specific programs. When she calls with a question, I know whether she needs a 2-minute answer or a 2-hour briefing. That's not efficiency optimization, Elias. That's relationship management. Felix jumped in. Oliver, that's exactly what I'm talking about. We can systematize those preferences, create standardized response protocols. Felix, I said, keeping my voice calm, have you ever briefed a classified technical proposal to a room full of colonels? Well, no, but have you ever had to explain to a procurement officer why a timeline slipped and what you're doing to fix it? Oliver, you're missing the point. Have you ever sat in a secure facility for 8 hours working through technical specifications with people who can shut down your project with one phone call? I don't need hands-on experience to provide strategic oversight. Yeah, you do. The room went quiet. Elias looked surprised. Felix looked like I just challenged him to a fight. Oliver, Elias said carefully, maybe we should discuss this privately. No, let's discuss it right here. Felix wants to optimize our government relationships. I want to know what happens when Colonel Reyes calls with a classified technical question and Felix can't answer it because he doesn't have clearance. His attempt to transfer classified information without proper clearance procedures violated the National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual and bordered on a breach of fiduciary duty, rendering his authority void ab initio. I want to know what happens when the Aberdeen project timeline needs adjustment, and Felix doesn't understand the technical constraints. I want to know what happens when we're competing against companies that have people like me and we've got consultants with PowerPoint presentations. Felix's face was turning red. Oliver, I think you're having trouble accepting new leadership approaches. I'm having trouble accepting that you think 20 years of specialized experience can be replaced with a business process. That's when Felix said the thing that changed everything. Oliver, let's be honest here. Government contracting isn't rocket science. Anyone with basic business skills can manage these relationships. You're not irreplaceable. The silence stretched for about 10 seconds. Elias was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. Felix was staring at me with that smug expression he got when he thought he'd made a brilliant point. You're right, I said. Finally, let's find out. I called Silas Cross from my truck in the parking lot. Silas, is that offer still open? Absolutely. When can you start? How about next Monday? Send me your resignation letter by Friday. I'll have the paperwork ready. That night, I typed up my resignation. 2 sentences effective immediately. I am resigning from my position at Advanced Defense Solutions. Thank you for the opportunity. I printed it, signed it, and put it in my briefcase. Friday morning, I walked it into Elias's office. He looked up from his computer, saw the letter, and his face went pale. Oliver, what's this about? Felix is right, Elias. I'm not irreplaceable. So you won't have any trouble finding someone else to manage the radar contract or the Aberdeen renewal or the Huntsville proposal that's due next month. Oliver, wait. Let's talk about this. I've taken a position with Pinnacle Defense Solutions. They seem to think my experience has value. I cleaned out my desk while Felix was at lunch. 20 years of files, contact lists, and relationship notes went into 3 boxes. The contract database stayed on the company's server, but the proprietary integration frameworks I developed were protected under 35 U.S.C., paragraph 271, meaning any unauthorized use constituted federal patent infringement. The real relationships, the ones built on trust and years of reliable service, those walked out with me. Felix got back as I was loading the last box into my truck. He watched from the parking lot, but didn't say anything. I think he was starting to understand that maybe he'd miscalculated. My phone buzzed as I drove to Pinnacle Defense. Text message from Colonel Reyes. Oliver, need to discuss radar project timeline. Please call when convenient. I called her from Silas's office while we were signing paperwork. Colonel, it's Oliver. I should mention that I'm no longer with Advanced Defense. Pause. I see. Are you still available to discuss the technical requirements? Yes, ma'am. I'm now with Pinnacle Defense Solutions. Oliver, I'm going to be direct. Felix Thorne called me yesterday about taking over the radar project. He doesn't understand the technical specifications, doesn't have the clearance to access half the documentation, and frankly, after our last meeting, I don't have confidence in his ability to manage this contract. I understand, ma'am. I'm recommending to my superiors that we transfer the contract to Pinnacle Defense with you as the technical lead. Are you prepared to handle that? I looked at Silas, who was grinning. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Elias called me at 6. He was 0 that evening. I was at home helping Julian with his algebra homework. Oliver, we need to talk. This is bigger than whatever happened between you and Felix. Is it? The radar contract is worth $47 million over 4 years. Colonel Reyes says the deal is off unless you're managing it personally. That's unfortunate. Don't play games with me, Oliver. 20 years should count for something. You're right, Elias. 20 years should count for something. But your restructuring put Felix in charge of relationships he didn't build in a business he's never worked with clients who don't know him and don't trust him. Felix has got an MBA from Vanderbilt. He understands business. Government contracts aren't business, Elias. They're relationships. They're security clearances that take years to get and can't be transferred. They're technical expertise that comes from actually doing the work. Felix doesn't have clearance to access half the files necessary to manage the radar contract, let alone the technical knowledge to answer Colonel Reyes's questions. We'll get him cleared. We'll bring in consultants. Secret clearance takes 18 months minimum, and that's if it gets approved. Colonel Reyes has worked with me for 8 years. She trusts my judgment on technical specifications and timeline management. She's not going to start over with someone new because Felix has an MBA. Long pause. What do you want, Oliver? I want Felix to understand that some people actually aren't replaceable. This is about ego. This is about competence. Felix spent 2 years taking credit for work he didn't do, relationships he didn't build, and expertise he doesn't have. Now he gets to find out what Vance's government division looks like without the person who actually runs it. I hung up and finished helping Julian with his homework. Claire came in with coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. Rough conversation, necessary one. The next morning brought 3 canceled contracts. Aberdeen pulled out of an $18 million testing facility upgrade. Huntsville suspended negotiations on a radar calibration project worth $12 million annually. Wright-Patterson canceled a preliminary discussion about a new project worth potentially $25 million. Each cancellation came with the same message. Primary contractor relationship terminated. Silas called me into his office at 10. Oliver, I've got to ask, did you know this would happen? I knew that Felix had convinced himself that government contracts were just about having the right paperwork and submitting competitive bids. I knew he didn't understand the relationship component, or the security clearance requirements, or the technical expertise expectations. What I didn't know was how quickly the clients would make their preferences clear. Your old company just lost $77 million in active contracts because one manager told one employee he wasn't irreplaceable. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? Felix spent 2 years systematically undervaluing the person who built every government relationship Vance had. He convinced himself that management credentials were more important than technical expertise and client trust. Now he's finding out what those relationships were actually worth. By noon, my phone had 23 missed calls from Vance numbers. Silas and I were reviewing Pinnacle's current contract portfolio when my personal phone rang. Oliver, this is Amanda Reyes. I wanted to call you directly. I stepped into the conference room. Colonel, good to hear from you. I'm calling because Elias Vance has been trying to reach me for 2 days, and I think there's some confusion about the radar contract situation. What kind of confusion, ma'am? Mr. Vance seems to think this is a negotiation that Vance can somehow maintain the contract with different personnel. I wanted to make it clear that's not the case. I see. Oliver, I've been doing defense procurement for 28 years. I've seen contractors come and go, and I've learned that relationships matter more than company names. The radar project involves classified technology integration with timeline requirements that can't accommodate learning curves or personnel transitions. She paused. The technical specifications require someone with your specific background and clearance level. The timeline doesn't allow for training or replacement. And frankly, after 8 years of working together, I'm not interested in starting over with someone who thinks he can manage defense contracts like commercial real estate. I understand, Colonel. Do you? Because I've had calls from Aberdeen and Wright-Patterson today. The consensus is clear. We work with you or we work with other contractors. Vance Defense without Oliver Reed isn't Vance Defense as far as the Department of Defense is concerned. After the call, I sat in the conference room for a few minutes processing what I just heard. It wasn't just about the radar contract. It was about the entire foundation of Vance's government business. Silas knocked on the door. Everything all right? Colonel Reyes just explained something I'd never fully understood. For 8 years, I thought I was working for Vance Defense, building some relationships that benefited the company. But from the client perspective, the relationship was always with me personally. The company was just the administrative framework. That's not uncommon in government contracting. Technical expertise and security clearances are personal assets. They don't transfer with company letterhead. Felix never understood that. He saw government contracts as company assets that could be managed by anyone with the right business training. And now he's discovering that $77 million in annual contract revenue was never really Brewer's to begin with. It was yours and you were sharing it with them. My phone buzzed with another call from Elias. I declined it. That afternoon, I learned that Felix had called a company-wide meeting to discuss what he termed temporary market fluctuations in the government sector. According to my former colleague Noah, Felix spent an hour explaining how they'd overcome the current challenges through enhanced business development and strategic partnerships. Noah texted me afterward. He actually said losing the contracts might be a blessing in disguise because government work is too bureaucratic. Anyway, I showed the text to Silas. Your former boss is about to learn that some blessings come with very expensive price tags. 3 days into my new position at Pinnacle Defense, Silas called me into his office with a proposal that made me understand why Felix's world was about to collapse completely. Oliver, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding relationship-based contracts. What if I told you that Pinnacle has been waiting for exactly this opportunity for 2 years? What kind of opportunity? The opportunity to absorb Vance's entire government client base by hiring the person who built it. Silas pulled out a folder with contract proposals and client assessments. We've been tracking Vance's government business for years, waiting for the right moment to make a move. They have great relationships but limited capacity. Pinnacle has enormous capacity but limited government relationships. And now we have both. Exactly. Colonel Reyes called me personally yesterday. She wants to fast-track the radar contract with Pinnacle as primary contractor and you as technical lead. She's also recommending us for 3 other projects that were previously going to other firms. The numbers were staggering. Wright Patterson was offering a contract extension worth $31 million over 6 years. Aberdeen wanted to expand their testing facility project to include Pinnacle's manufacturing capabilities. Huntsville had 2 separate radar projects they wanted to discuss. Silas, this isn't just about hiring me away from Vance. This is about absorbing their entire government client base. Correct. And it's all possible because one manager thought relationships were interchangeable. That afternoon, I made calls to procurement officers I'd worked with for years. Each conversation followed the same pattern. I'd explain my move to Pinnacle Defense, and they'd immediately want to know about transferring existing contracts and exploring new opportunities. Major Maria Vargas from Aberdeen was the most direct. Oliver Vance's current management seems to think government contracts are just paperwork. We need partners who understand that these projects involve national security considerations and can't be managed like strip mall development. By the end of the week, Pinnacle had received formal requests for proposal on 8 major contracts previously designated for Vance. The total value exceeded $94 million over the next 5 years. Felix called me directly on Friday afternoon. Oliver, this is getting out of hand. Elias is willing to discuss a significant raise and a promotion if you'll consider coming back. I was in Pinnacle's new government contracts office, which Silas had set up specifically for the business we'd acquired from Vance. What kind of promotion? Director level, your own department. I'd report to you on government matters. What changed Elias's mind about the value of specialized expertise? Felix's voice was tight. Look, maybe I underestimated some things, but you're destroying a company that gave you 20 years of opportunity. Felix, I'm not destroying anything. I'm working somewhere that understands the difference between management credentials and industry expertise. The board is asking questions, Oliver. They want to know how we lost $77 million in contracts in 1 week. What are you telling them? I'm telling them that some employees are vindictive when they don't get their way. I looked out the window at the Toac River. Are you also telling them that you don't have security clearance for the contracts you're supposed to manage? Or that you've never worked a single government project from start to finish? Or that you told your only qualified government contractor he wasn't irreplaceable? Felix hung up. An hour later, Elias called. Oliver, I need you to understand something. Felix is gone. I'm prepared to offer you his position, plus equity, plus a 70% salary increase. Elias, that's generous. But why didn't any of this matter when Felix was convinced I wasn't irreplaceable? Because I trusted his assessment of the situation. And now I know what $77 million in lost contracts feels like. The call that really drove the point home came Monday morning. Silas knocked on my office door with a grin I'd never seen before. Oliver, you need to hear this. He put his phone on speaker. Elias's voice filled the room tight with barely controlled panic. Silas, I'm calling to discuss a partnership opportunity between Pinnacle and Vance Defense. What kind of partnership, Elias? We want to subcontract our government division to Pinnacle. Pinnacle would handle all government contracts, and Vance would focus on commercial projects. Silas looked at me and raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting proposal. What would that arrangement look like? Pinnacle would take over all existing government contracts and relationships. Vance would provide administrative support and facility access. Revenue would be split 70-30 in Pinnacle's favor. I leaned forward and spoke into the phone. Hello, Elias. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Oliver, I should have known you'd be part of this conversation. Actually, Elias, I am this conversation. Every government relationship you're trying to license to Pinnacle belongs to me personally. The clients made that very clear. Oliver, be reasonable. Vance invested 20 years in your development, and Felix spent 2 years explaining how easily replaceable that investment was. Turns out he was wrong. Silas took over. Elias, here's our counteroffer. Pinnacle Defense will consider acquiring Vance's government division assets, office space, equipment, and administrative staff for fair market value. All contracts and client relationships stay with Oliver and Pinnacle. That would eliminate our entire government division. Yes, I said just like Felix eliminated it last week when he told me I wasn't irreplaceable. The board is meeting this afternoon, Oliver. They're going to want explanations. Tell them the truth, Elias. Tell them that Felix managed to lose $77 million in annual revenue by dismissing the one person who actually generated it. Tell them that not irreplaceable turned out to be the most expensive phrase in Vance defense history. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office at Pinnacle Defense when Noah called with news from Vance. Felix got fired yesterday. Board meeting lasted 8 hours. Elias is taking direct control of what's left of the government division, but there's nothing left to control. What about the other employees? Most of the administrative staff transferred to Pinnacle with the asset acquisition. Engineering is focusing entirely on commercial projects now, about half their previous revenue base, but at least it's stable. And Felix, here's the thing about Felix. Turns out when you tell someone they're not an irreplaceable genius and they decide to test that theory, you better be right. Noah laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Word around town is he can't get interviews. Defense contractors talk to each other. Oliver, everyone knows he's the guy who burned down a $77 million business because he didn't understand how it worked. What's he doing now? Last I heard, he was trying to get back into commercial real estate. But even there, people are asking questions. Why would someone leave a VP position at a defense contractor? Why did Vance's government division collapse right after he took over? His story keeps changing depending on who's asking. I looked out my office window at the PTWAC. The view from the 15th floor was pretty spectacular. Noah, thanks for keeping me informed. Oliver, one more thing. Colonel Reyes called Elias directly yesterday. She wanted to make sure he understood that this wasn't personal against Vance Defense. She said you'd always been professional and that Pinnacle was lucky to have you. That was kind of her. She also said something else. She said Felix's behavior in that Pentagon meeting was conduct unbecoming and that procurement officers across the deed had been briefed about the situation. Oliver, they blacklisted him officially. Guy's never working government contracts again. After the call, I sat quietly for a few minutes thinking about how things change. 3 weeks ago, Felix was convinced that MBA credentials and management theory were more valuable than 20 years of relationship building and technical expertise. Now he knows the difference. I started reviewing the radar contract specifications. Colonel Reyes wanted to accelerate the timeline, and we had the resources to deliver ahead of schedule. It felt good to be working with people who understood that some relationships, some expertise, some experience really can't be replaced by a business process or a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning that respect earned through competence and dedication always outlasts the authority that comes from a corner office and an expensive degree. Felix learned that lesson the hard way. As for me, I learned something too. After 20 years of building something valuable, it's okay to take it with you when you go. Chloe got into Virginia Tech with a partial scholarship. Julian made varsity football as a sophomore. Claire and I paid off the mortgage 2 years early. Turns out some people really aren't replaceable after